Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's lunch break. I'm Carrie, and today we're talking with Jude Abu Zaineh. Jude is a Palestinian-Canadian multidisciplinary artist and cultural worker. Her practice relies on the use of food and technology to investigate meanings of culture, displacement, diaspora, and belonging. She's interested in ideals of home and community while working to develop aesthetics rooted in her childhood and upbringing in a Muslim environment in the Middle East. Her work also appeared in our virtual show Tech Art Fair in partnership with the Ontario Science Centre. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jude. We're happy to have you. And for everyone listening, we will have an audience Q&A portion at the end. So if you have questions throughout the talk, you can type those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. To start off, can you give us a brief overview of your work and the mediums and subjects that you focus on?
Thank you. Also, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to do this. I'm super excited, and thank you to all the attendees that are here for taking a break with me. So I also want to say my work is, as someone who is Palestinian, who's grown up in Kuwait and later immigrated to Canada, and also now being situated in upstate New York in America, there's like this whole other added layer of complexity to identity politics that's present in my work. You can hit the next slide. My research into immigrant food practices also allows me to further explore what it means for Palestinians to exist in this migratory space of what I think of as in-betweenness, where you're attempting to conform and adapt to the cultures and traditions of one's new homesteads, but also trying to maintain a connection to Palestinian heritage identity or one's own cultural identity. And so in this image and in the next slide, you'll see that there's a spread of traditional Palestinian food, and that's predominantly been kind of like step one of how I've been starting my work nowadays, where there's a social engagement element. I make a spread of traditional Palestinian food. I invite a number of people to join in, and I think about the dinner table as the site for alternate discussion and a site for alternate discourse to what you typically see in traditional and mainstream media, especially in North American media, about Palestinian narrative and the discourse around that. And so it becomes this opportunity for really meaningful discussion and a shared cultural experience. And you can go to the next slide now. And so Matluba has become this central component in my work, and it's become kind of like the star meal, the main thing that I make a lot of my artwork from. And Matluba is a traditional Palestinian dish, and it's comprised of a number of different layers of ingredients that all come together and cook cohesively in one giant pot. And once it's done cooking, you flip this pot upside down on this large serving platter, and you're left with this very sculptural dish, which you can see on the left side. And you can literally see the layers of all these different ingredients coming together. And so I've been very drawn to using this specific food because of the literal visual metaphor to the complex layers of this like in-betweenness and this migratory existence that a lot of newcomers, refugees, and immigrants sort of exist within. But also, I really love this food. It's this dish that I grew up eating, and I have like very fond memories around it. So you can feel free to Google this recipe. I wrote the name of the dish up there, or you can email me and I can send you the recipe that I use that is an adaptation of my grandma's recipe that I've also made like a few tweaks of my own too, of like things that I enjoy in cooking. You can go to the next slide. And so here, and in the next slide also, you'll see other moments of these beautiful like cross-cultural communication and cross-cultural moments where these two meals were served during my time at Cultivamos Cultura as an artist in residence in South Portugal and São Luís. And food becomes this really great vehicle and way to talk about displacement, placemaking, home, and cultural ideals, but also thinking about cultural legacy. And so I think a lot about recipes and storytelling as these like portable ways of continuing cultural legacy, especially at a time where there is cultural erasure and, you know, during this like very difficult political time. Next slide, please. And so I'm able to take the leftovers from a lot of these meals and they make their way into these small petri dishes. And a lot of my work starts small scale in these petri dishes. And then I'm able to take documentation of the growth and decay over time. Sometimes I play with text. Sometimes I'm just letting the foods lay however way they want in the petri dish and just kind of like seeing what happens. And you can see other versions of this growth and decay in the next slide in some of the petri dishes. And then I'm able to take these still images and turn them into moving images. And so I create these videos where I'm reflecting and refracting these still images to look like you're looking through a kaleidoscopic lens. And so aesthetically, I'm very drawn to sacred geometry, a lot of these like nuances and nodes to Islamic art and the kaleidoscope really. And you can see some of the iterations of how these manifest in the next 2 slides. So everything that you see in these projections is what you previously saw in the petri dishes. So the source material is the leftover metluba in the petri dishes, but it's just been manipulated and reflected and refracted and projected in these like very large scale installation. And then in the next slide, you can also see other ways of using the source material of what you previously saw in the petri dish. So here, this is an installation in Portugal as a result of that Cultivamus Cultura residency, where I'm using the actual metluba itself. I've preserved it in resin, and also some of the petri dishes are present in the little drawers of the table. And then in the next slide, you'll see how I'm also playing with this like provisional stacking of older, like more modest technology. I'm often switching between analog, digital, contemporary, and traditional modes of display and working through making my work. And in the next slide too, you'll see another iteration of playing with these different technologies and different projections. And in the next slide, again, seeing the same source material of what previously existed in the petri dish, this is literally what you're seeing, but just manifested in this reflected and refracted way through the kaleidoscopic lens. And so what you're seeing here is actual metluba, but it's just been like manipulated onto itself so many different ways in reference to Islamic art and sacred geometry. And so in the next slide, you'll see another extracted pattern. And in the next one too, there's another extracted image from these videos. And next one, you can see that I'm also able to take a lot of these images and turn them into a number of different installation strategies. So here I have a number of different prints installed in Mexico. And there's another image of the same installation in the next slide. And another strategy that I also use, which you'll see in the next slide, is I'm often thinking about making these unfamiliar spaces more familiar to me. And so I'm often thinking about domesticity and how to domesticate spaces that maybe feel like a little bit sterile to me or cold and concrete. And so in this example, there's a site-specific installation at the Ontario Science Centre, and it's this very brutalist architecture with, you know, massive, just gray concrete everywhere. And immediately I wanted to intervene and create this like curtain, very soft installation that's like unassuming. It kind of like blends in, but really softens the space. And the textile itself has a lot of the patterns that we previously saw from the petri dishes, from the videos that I've created. And so that becomes like another strategy of how I'm constantly reusing and repurposing the same source material, which is metluba. And in the next slide, you'll see the petri dishes themselves, I think about as art objects and like cultural artifacts in a way. These moments of preservation of this cultural moment, this pause in time. And in the next image, you'll see another installation shot of the same series of petri dishes where I'm thinking about the dot matrix and how I can create like a pattern within the pattern. And so that's basically like a very brief overview of some of the works and strategies and ways that I've been navigating through the use of food in my practice, and
Great.
how I navigate between like the kitchen, the lab, and a lot of these different spaces.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's beautiful to see the different forms of inspiration that have come from this one dish for you. And I would imagine the experience of walking through these exhibits or being at the meal is really deep and rich.
Thank you.
Um, will you tell us what you've been working on more recently?
Yes. So if you go to the next slide, one more. So there's a number of like new projects and new ideas that I've been navigating through at this moment, but I'm just going to focus on two of them for now, because we don't have a lot of time. So here again, thinking about the petri dishes as sort of like the infancy of how my work begins. I've been thinking a lot about, of course, placemaking and home and belonging is this thorough line in my practice. And so here I'm referencing Robert Indiana's Love series, but also Jennifer Willett's Biotechnology is a Technology of Love, where I'm thinking about this collaboration that I have with food. They are my collaborators in that they are more than just a source material. They grow and decay and rot and kind of have like a mind of their own in a way, and how they decay and decompose and turn into the visuals that you see in front of you. But also thinking about how there's this reciprocal act of care in a way, because I'm taking care of these foods, although they are like grotesque in the way that I'm dealing with them in petri dishes, they also keep me going in my practice and in my day-to-day. And so this is like the preliminary idea behind this work. And if you go to the next slide, I'm starting to think about patterning, and again, thinking about like textiles and patterns that exist within the home, and different strategies that you take when you're trying to make a place feel more homey. And so I've started to develop these different patterns that I'm printing on actual wallpaper. And the intent is to create an installation where I'm thinking about a different scale, with the petri dishes being really small, but papering, like doing a paste up that's like really large in a gallery. So if you go to the next slide, there's another iteration with a different color palette. And then there's another one in the next slide that I'm testing out. And so again, the intent is to paste up a very large installation, and within the wallpaper itself, I will have actual petri dishes with the different rice grains at different stages of decomposition that are embedded in the wallpaper. And again, I think a lot about these like binaries that exist, but also that I really tried to extract within my practice, this sort of making the invisible visible, thinking about public versus private, taking these like very vulnerable internalized feelings and making them more present, thinking about the home in terms of like as a private space versus making it very publicized in these installations. And in this particular work, what will happen for the viewer is also thinking about this like back and forth situation with the viewer's body encompassed by the work itself, thinking about this tension of the in-betweenness and forcing the viewer to move back and forth, similar to this experience of existing both here and there and being caught in the middle. And then in the next slide, you can see that in-betweenness is also like very linguistically present in some of my work. In this particular series, It's a flashing neon sign that plays on the nuances of Arabic language. And it describes how someone who moves away from the Middle East and their relationship to the West. So there's this like nuance in one letter flashing on and off in the Arabic text that totally changes the meaning of the word or of the sign. And again, thinking about this like very internalized, vulnerable experience and feeling and presenting it in this very public domain in terms of like the neon sign being as public as it can be. And so in the next image, I've actually started, before COVID, I started to learn how to bend neon, and I was working with this really brilliant artist in San Francisco who was teaching me the ropes. And you can see in the next image the culmination of this piece that I started making. And in this particular work, it reads Kanya Makan, which is like the opening sentence or the opening sequence of like once upon a time translated in Arabic. But there's a funny nuance in the spacing of letters where depending on where you place that space, it can also read once upon a place. So again, thinking about this like existence, this in-betweenness, that tension of here and there, present, past, future, and so on. So yeah, that's basically the culmination in like briefly of the things that I'm thinking through at the moment.
Great. Thank you so much. And of course, this is a strange time to be creating as an artist, but where can we see your work next, or how can we keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure lots of artists and creatives are dealing with the same thing where a lot of our shows and residencies and events are being canceled or indefinitely rescheduled or, you know, what have you. So fortunately, I had a very busy schedule, as you can see, of all the different like shows and events that I'm supposed to be working on right now, but all of these have pretty much been indefinitely rescheduled. But I will be posting about, you know, what's to come on my website and also on my Instagram, which I'm usually posting like little tidbits of works in progress and that type of thing.
Great. We're gonna take some questions from the audience now, and you can still send those in. And Julia is gonna hop in.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us. And Jude, thank you so much for sharing your work. It's really great to see what you've been up to since we last checked in with you. So I'm Julia, I'm the director of SciArt, and I'm going to voice some of the questions that we have in from the audience, and we'll get to as many as we can. But there's still time, so get them. The first question is, how has the pandemic affected your work on a practical and inspirational level?
Oh, it's been rough. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I spend a lot of time working in my studio, which I no longer have access to because of the pandemic. But I often think about switching between, like when I'm working in the lab and when I'm working in my kitchen, I think about them being very similar. Like I'm often approaching a lot of the technologies and the methodologies in the lab in the same way that I do the kitchen. I think about a lot of these different procedures and methods in anything like science related when I'm working in a lab as like a recipe from a cookbook, and I'm often approaching them in the same way. So lucky for me, a lot of my work as of late has been, my source material is leftover food. So I'm still cooking, I'm still taking these leftovers and kind of playing with them with petri dishes at home and just documenting the growth and decay over time. I've also been thinking a lot about preservation. And again, thinking in terms of thinking about cultural legacy and preserving that particular like identity or moment in time. So I've been working on preserving some of these things that I'm growing in petri dishes, but it's still a work in progress. So I guess stay tuned.
Yeah, and we'll see how creative you have to get and how long this time lasts, or things are just kind of different for a really long time. It is definitely a weird time for food. I feel like people are thinking about food in a different way now. For a lot of people out there, they're thinking about food as, you know, something that really happens in the kitchen, not something that happens at a restaurant or in a takeout container. So maybe we'll see more food art out there in the future. We have another question in. When you said that the Petri dish designs had been laid out on top of each other to create these patterns, I'm not sure which piece, but this could apply to a number of your works. The question is, are you just letting the design become what it wants to be, or are you laying it down in different patterns and putting them together? So how much is kind of dictated by some master plan versus how much of it is intuitive or has other influential factors?
It's funny you ask that, because if you had asked me this question maybe like 5 years ago, I would have given you a very rigid answer where, I am the author of this work and I have this very particular thought process behind exactly what I want it to look like. And if it doesn't manifest physically that way, then it's dead to me and the work isn't successful. But now I have this like very different relationship with the work, because I realize that I am working with a biological material and it is going to some degree do what it wants, and I only have so much agency over that. So I do allow myself like this margin or buffer for like a surprise in a way. So I do go into a lot of my work having like a blueprint in my brain, and I have an idea of what I hope it will look like, but I'm okay with it meandering and turning into something a little bit different, if that makes sense. And in some of the petri dishes, I am being more methodical and I am laying down some of the leftovers in a more mechanical way, and being more like purposeful in how I'm laying down each rice grain or, whatever it may be. And in other times, I'm just kind of like, rolling the dice and letting whatever happens. And both yield like very interesting results, I think.
Great. Where did you learn to make maqluba?
I mean, watching a lot of the women in my family over the years, like it was this very like traditional thing in my family where almost like every weekend we would get together and have a family meal, and more often than not, maqluba was like the star dish on the table. So I've learned watching my grandmothers make it, my mother make it, but also as of late, trying to connect more and more with my cultural heritage, just like looking up recipes online and that type of thing. But also, if anyone is interested in getting the exact recipe that I use, you can email me and I'm happy to share it with you.
So yeah, that's a nice segue to our next question. How can people get in touch with you? We have a question about what your website is, what your Instagram handle is, and maybe you can share your email as well.
You can go to the next slide. I have all that information there. But you can...
Perfect.
You can email me, you can look at my website, although I am guilty of not constantly updating it as much as I should. I'm most active on my Instagram, so we can also chat there.
Great. Well, that is all the time that we have questions for. But Jude, thank you so much for joining us. It was so nice to hear from you and see what you're up to, and I can't wait to see what you do next. And I will let Carrie wrap us up here.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to learn more about your process and have some inspiration come from kitchens right in our homes. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and we hope you'll join us for our next lunch break, which will be Wednesday the 27th at 1 p.m. with Laura Splan. As always, you can stay up to date on what we're doing by joining our mailing list at sciartinitiative.org. Thanks so much. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.